Hello, and welcome to the We're Not Stumped podcast. I'm your host, Mike Boland, and I'm a congenital amputee of the right hand. In this show, I will interview other amputees and allow them to tell you their incredible life stories. I'll also feature family members of amputees and others who support the amputee community, all in an effort to discuss the challenges and triumphs of those living with limb loss. So stick around and listen to inspirational stories and find out why we say, We're Not Stumped. Well, hello everyone, welcome to the We're Not Stumped podcast. I'm your host, Mike Boland, and today I've got a very special guest. We're actually recording this together, which usually doesn't happen with the podcast, maybe 2 or 3 times, maybe 4 times in the history, but I'm very excited to have Mr. Todd Key on. Todd does a lot of things. He's a very successful cyclist, a cancer survivor, and a para-Olympian. We're going to talk about that today and quite a bit more with Todd. But Todd, first of all, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Well, thank you for the invite, Mike.
Oh, it's always a pleasure. So we always start the podcast with a segment I call In Your Own Words. So I'd like the listeners to learn a little bit more about you.
Well, it's a long and complicated story. So
It definitely is.
How far should I go back?
Well, I know at 4, you fell off a tree, if I'm not mistaken, and
7.
7, okay.
Yes. I grew up in South Chicago, so very far south. My parents were overreaching in their desires to have a big house and look the part. So at one point when I was 5, they moved into a new house. The new house had a very long and windy driveway. On that long and windy driveway was a iron barrier between the driveway and the grass. And my aunt and uncle had visited and had given me a bow and arrow set, thinking that was ideal for a 7-year-old. So I quickly shot an arrow into a tree, quickly climbed up into that tree. Where I was in the tree happened to be over the barrier between the driveway and the grass, and when I fell, I landed on this arm, and because of what I landed on, it ended up being a compound fracture, and took me to a hospital in the suburbs, far south Chicago. They, of course, none of this do I remember, but quickly it turned south. After 4 or 5 days, I had a 105 fever, and they pulled my parents aside and told them that I was probably going to die unless they took me somewhere that could understand what was happening. So they loaded me in an ambulance and took me downtown to what essentially was a real hospital.
Wow.
In the 60s. And they quickly started surgery, cleaned the affected area, got rid of the infection. I survived because of that. And then I started what turned out to be almost a year in the hospital as kind of a experimental patient.
Wow.
Of course, I don't know any of this other than looking back to what happened. So over the maybe 8, 9, 10 months, I went in for 10 to 20 different surgeries, some more major than others, but the surgeries included removing bones that, were no longer hadn't healed, or skin grafts, which I'm not sure if that process has changed, but back then they sutured whatever part of your body to some other part of your body for the skin graft to take. So they started with my leg for skin, and that didn't work. So that was a 6 or 8 week procedure. Then they moved on to my stomach, and sorry, I didn't anticipate. And
Wow.
so then they attached my arm to my stomach
Wow.
to get skin, and that ended up working. And along the way, they decided they were going to do some tendon transplants because all the tendons had died in the infection. So no longer any functioning tendons to my fingers. And I do not believe that that is something that is successful. But in the 60s, apparently they thought maybe it was. So the function I ended up with is my thumb.
Okay.
Can do that.
Wow.
Fingers have always been closed like this because that's what happens when tendons die. They don't die and then just leave your hand open.
I didn't know that. Okay.
So it's very handy now for
holding your phone.
Modern technology.
Yeah.
So I can put it in there, and then every so often I'll have something in my hand, and I'll start looking for it, wondering where it is. Turns out I eventually find it in my hand. Phones, keys, Kleenex, all kinds of things. So finally, at some point, I guess they just realized there was going to be no success, sent me home to restart where I had left off or begin again. So I had been right-handed.
Oh, I was going to ask that question. Okay.
So I had learned to write and do everything. And at age 7 is about when you actually learn to write. So then I had to
relearn.
Relearn. Yeah. So I spent a lot of time, several months after school. I remember I had a pretty fabulous teacher. Don't remember her name or anything about her, but I know, looking back, she was amazing and different, than what I encountered most of the time. And then, being different and having this weird looking arm. Back then, it was, you just, you fight for yourself. There's no, there's no authority to go to. There's no, and you're a kid, so you're not really telling anybody, and pretending like everything's okay.
Yeah.
So many encounters of, physical bullying, verbal bullying. Most of it I don't remember. The human brain is pretty good at eliminating the bad memories. So I don't know all that went on. I do remember a couple of years in, I was being accosted by some bully, and the bullies were typically someone who was mentally challenged or, or whatever, abuse from their family. And I only know this, from what I know now, but, at some point, there was a fight that it was supposed to happen, and there was a crowd gathered, and all, with no understanding of anything, I somehow punched somebody in the face, and that kind of ended the physical bullying, mostly, because once you get punched in the face as an 8-year-old, you don't want that to happen again.
Yeah, I think there's an expression, punch the bully in the face. I think there's even an expression, punch the bully in the mouth or something like that. And you did it. You're the first person I met that has done it.
So then it was just strange encounters that I don't remember most of, and just feeling weird and getting no support, and my family was listening to doctors, and the doctors explained to them that if I wear this very strange, painful brace, that it will open my fingers eventually, and maybe I'll be able to use them or something. So
you wore a brace for a lot of years?
For 2 or 3 or 4 years, wow. I had this insane device that tried to stretch my fingers out that just was excruciatingly painful because your fingers were not supposed to do that. And but you know, whoever might know that wasn't part of the process.
Mm-hmm.
So it just made my parents, my father's angry, So
When you say angry at you or the situation?
angry
or...
at me that I wasn't wearing my brace, that there wasn't, things weren't getting better, or and of course I just didn't want to wear it because it was insane. But at the time I didn't. I just knew it hurt. So, and of course, there's no explaining, and they're not listening to an explanation. So they gave me a hard time for a while, and then just kind of gave up on it at some point.
Yeah,
I don't remember when. They just either decided it wasn't working or whatever.
This is so interesting because, like, I did a lot of reading about you already. We're meeting in Toastmasters, so you just gave your icebreaker speech, so I even learned more. But now the time between what you're probably going to get to next and what you went through originally at 7, those years are getting closer to me because I'm thinking 10 years apart, but it isn't 10 years apart. You went through a lot of things almost up to something happened when you were 17.
Well, yes. I mean, looking back on it, I know now, my interactions with people were, kind of revolved around the way I looked and like what was happening and, why was I different and, what that was all about. And of course, I was a kid. I didn't want to talk about it, or explain it or, help people understand. Right. And the 1960s and 70s, people with disabilities were not in public. And for a reason. So they were, in basements or attics, or didn't go to school, or So I went to school through all of this, but just miserable for multiple reasons. So at age 12, and at that somewhere around that age, I had older brothers and they smoked pot, and so I started stealing their pot, and so trying to escape, none of which helped the situation or made me deal with it, or there was no healthy path. So it was smoke as much pot and get into as much trouble as I possibly could. And my parents, parenting back then was the way it was. It was, you were just a side note.
Yeah.
They didn't, there was no focus on you. They had their own problems and a bunch of kids, right? And, big house to worry about. And so, so at some point, 10 years later, over a holiday vacation, I was the youngest and the smallest. And this old house needed fiberglass insulation in the ceiling, and it was 3-story monstrosity of a house, and the attic was just a hole that you squeezed up into, and so just rafters, 2x10s. So I remember just a few days of my dad kind of just shoving these rolls of fiberglass and me cutting fiberglass and crawling around on my knees.
Probably no mask either, right? Or did you?
No, there were no masks.
Wow.
There were no knee pads, there were no masks, there were no gloves.
Nothing.
So I just, did it, right? Didn't think anything of it. I just remember every night feeling this itchiness in my knees and not really understanding what it was. But it was, clear as, day after day, it was more and more, and knees feel weird and they're itchy, but I can't really see anything. Some glints of glass, and and you can't clean it and you can't wash it. It doesn't go away, and so I guess I just kind of endured. And then because of my situation and because of my arm, I had gotten a little bit of a settlement from the malpractice, and my parents used that settlement money to send me away to a private school. So a few hours north in Wisconsin, there was a private school that I was going to. In a Christmas break, I came back and to school, and I was a skateboarder and a tennis player, and I noticed something on my knee that didn't feel right, and you could see it, and I just thought it was a bruise, something that was just going to go away. And my parents weren't there, and so it was just the staff, and I didn't tell anybody for a long time. So 2 weeks turned into 2 months, and this thing on my knee was now gigantic and painful to bend my knee, painful to do anything with my knee. And finally I said to someone, there's something's not right with my knee, and they looked at it and sent me to a local hospital, and they looked at it and went, oh yeah, this is nothing we can deal with.
Wow.
So within 6 hours I was on a train back to Chicago.
Was it the same hospital?
I did end up at the same hospital.
Wow.
The second time, because that was like the main hospital in Chicago, one of the big ones. And so they just looked at it immediately, took a biopsy immediately, and the next day it's like, okay, well, we're gonna have to amputate your leg, because that's we just want to make sure we get all the cancer. And it was mainly just discussions between the doctors and my parents.
Wow.
And I wasn't privy to really any of it, other than we got to get rid of this, and this is how we're going to do it. And then chemotherapy, we'll start that the next day. And I just I remember coming out of surgery and like knowing that this is the most painful thing that's ever happened to me. And and you're a kid, so you're not like understanding just shoot the morphine straight into my leg,
Wow.
kind of a thing. So you're just going based on what they give you or whatever. It was 12 hours, pretty horrific pain. But quickly, wanted to forget about that, not think about it if I didn't have to. And then it was, a few weeks later, off to, prosthetics, have a leg made. And this is long ago when legs weren't, fantastic in any way, but it was something. The pain, was continuing, and the medications. Now I was at home, so it was like, take whatever you want, whenever you want. And I, remember after 4 or 5 weeks that the pain meds were making me so sick and making me feel so shitty that that I had to stop taking them.
Mm-hmm.
And not long after, the pain from the surgery was gone, and I wasn't taking anything. And then going to have a leg made, just doing whatever they told me. A few weeks later, I had this leg and had to, learn to walk. And this is back when they made legs to resemble your other leg. Mm-hmm. So they had foam covers and things to, fill your pants out and to make it look as much like a leg as possible. But, Chicago, you're wearing pants, so it really doesn't matter what it looks like. And it, when you got pants on and when you have this prosthetic foam cover on, the thing doesn't work properly because it can't swing normally, and it, it's just funky in every possible way. And all of this shit I didn't know anything about.
No.
I didn't know.
I find it fascinating, though, some way with your experience, you've seen, I don't want to guess how many decades, but a lot of decades of progress when it comes to prosthetics, and you've lived through it.
Well, there was no progress for a long time. It was a very definite date when all the progress started.
Really interesting.
Yeah, so there was wood
Yeah.
and fiberglass legs, right?
Okay.
So they paint the fiberglass to look like wood. Parts of it would be wood, parts of it, but it
And
all.
these are all things that you actually wore?
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
and they painted it, or they put this cover on it, um, or they did both. So it was a multiple of things, and the technology was had been the same for years. You were given this uh, sock that goes under cast, so it's a
Hmm.
sock that's cut at both ends, and you put the sock up on your leg as much as you can, and then you put the sock through this hole in the prosthetic, and then you pull your leg in because you can't just slide it in because the skin doesn't fit naturally
Yeah.
inside of it, so you have to pull this thing in. And being left-handed with the right leg, I'm pulling from the wrong side.
Wow.
And I live in Chicago where it's humid,
Yeah.
and humidity is the opposite of prosthetic friendly. So if you're warm or hot or humid or even slightly wet, the thing doesn't. So then there's this um, talcum powder technique. So then you have talcum powder all over everything constantly, and then every time you stand or sit, the fit disintegrates. So prosthetics are made for walking; they're not made for anything else.
Wow.
The design of them just completely falls apart the moment you sit down.
And this is then or even now?
No, that's then and now.
Okay.
But then it was particularly difficult because every time to get it to fit again, you had to go through this process of pulling in. So you would have to go find a bathroom or somewhere private,
Hmm.
and there's never any chairs or seats or any place to sit, and bathrooms are disgusting,
Yeah.
publicly.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
they're much nicer now, but they didn't used to be.
Yeah.
And it depends where you live, Phoenix, the bathrooms are nice, mostly. So you just end up just dealing with the bad fit most of the time, which just leads to skin problems constantly. So you never know what day you'll wake up and you can't put your leg on, so you can't walk, right? So you destroy the skin, and you're young and stupid and not paying attention, and you just want to walk, and so you just suffer through the pain of walking and destroying your skin just in order to make it easy. And you don't want to have to explain to somebody every time you stand up, oh, I got to go do this thing. So and you can't just stand all the time,
Mhm.
and you can't just sit all the time. And you can see I'm sitting here without my leg on,
Yeah.
and I never sit with it on
Yeah, I was gonna say most of the times I see you sitting, you don't have it on. Yeah.
because they're not designed that way.
Yeah.
And there's no way to design them that way, because if they designed them for sitting, then you couldn't stand.
Good point.
So you have no option. Fortunately, the technology has changed, and you don't have to go through this process. And if you are like me, I don't care anymore what it looks like,
Yeah.
or what people think, or what they see, or
Mhm.
how it presents. I just do whatever is the most comfortable. So I don't drive with it. I don't sit with it at home. I don't go to wear it at movies. I don't wear it in restaurants. Wherever I am, it just comes off.
Mm-hmm.
So until 2003, the technology was pretty much identical.
I was going to ask you what the year was. Thank you for that delineation. I was curious.
Yes, 2003, the world changed after the Iraq War, the second one.
Mm-hmm.
There were many more casualties coming back, and many of them were amputees, thanks to IEDs.
Yeah.
So that opened this gigantic market up that had never existed before. And on top of the market being huge, it was being funded by the government, the military. So this huge, massive technology boom happened because they'd been working on it for a long time, but they just couldn't sell it to anybody.
Got it.
Right? Or
Yeah.
there was, no insurance companies that would pay for the expense, right? So prosthetics tripled in price because of the technology change. So in 2005, those legs became more common. I think 2006, I got my first one, and that's when the electronic knee arrived. Yeah. And that's when the not long after, the silicone sleeves arrived. I have one in my bag somewhere, but it's this thing that is basically just a rubber silicone cover. And you pull that up, and that stays on as long as you want it to stay on. It's like wearing a plastic bag. So when you're sitting like this in an air-conditioned place, you're not sweating much, so the fit is pretty normal, and you can just put your leg on at ease and take it off. Once you start moving or running, or which I do, or walking fast, or you're in a humid environment, which is not Arizona, you don't have to move to start sweating.
Yeah.
The silicone becomes not such a good fit. So that is mainly why Arizona is my home. It's just the dryness. Yeah. Is prosthetic friendly. So the electronic knee showed up, and that changed the way, when you're standing, it changed the big change was the electronics were able to identify when the knee was collapsing.
Oh, okay.
So it's not really, in my case, it's not really important to me that the swing is more natural, or because the computers decide how fast to swing, how fast you're walking. So there's a computer inside gauging, or immediately reacting to the speed of your walking, so it swings faster, swings slower. But the big thing was, for my entire life, I had without the electronics, the knee was just free swinging. Okay. So there was no locking mechanism. So you never knew when you were going to not be standing with it locked straight, and you never knew. Sometimes you knew, but most of the time there was nothing you could do about it.
You're already on the ground, I would imagine, right?
You were already on the ground.
Yeah. Wow.
So multiple times, just in different situations, just leaning back or doing something, not thinking for a second, not constantly analyzing what your leg is doing. All the things that are natural to a human leg. So I used to hit the ground all the time, which is fine when you're 6 or 16, yeah, or 26. But you get to be, my age, 29, 30, 31.
31 now, yes.
32, okay. You don't want to be on the ground, yeah, instantly. Yeah. You don't bounce back very quickly if you fall the wrong way. But 2005, those knees appeared. 2006, I think I had one, and from that moment on, I never hit the ground because of a knee collapsing. But they have motors, and they have batteries, and you have to plug them in, and you have to charge them up, yeah, and you can use them when they're not charged, but they're just stiff swinging. And all of that technology weighs a lot.
Yeah.
So you pay the price for weight, and the weight then affects the liner and how it stays on and slips off, or so and wears out. These liners just the walking effect just pulls on the liner, and the liners just disintegrate quickly.
Wow.
So typically they give you a leg, they give you 2 liners, and they expect them to last for a year. So you get 2 liners a year. You need more than that, you either pay for it or you have really good insurance. And the insurance is just a battle.
Yes, it is.
Where they're just saying, no,
yeah.
It's not been a year or
yeah.
this. And because the guys who make the prosthetics don't use the prosthetics, they don't understand what the best way to go about it is. So they don't know, okay, this is the best liner because it lasts the longest, or this is the best liner because it's the most comfortable, but then it doesn't last as long. And then the ones that last as long, that last longer, that are the more durable, or the ones that stretch the least, also disintegrate in a different way. And so it's been 20 years about, and it's only in the last couple of years that I finally started to figure it out. Like, it's taken me that long to understand, because you can't just go, okay, I want to try this liner, and I want to try this one, and I want to try this one, and then I'm going to figure out what's. They just hand them to you, and you just kind of go, okay, I guess, and then, depending on who you are and how active you are and how much you weigh and how much you gain weight and how much you lose weight, prosthetics have to be adjusted constantly. So, that can be 100 hours a year that you're spending driving to and fro, and and if you have a full-time job, when do you do that? And they're not open on the weekends. So what do people who have schedules do? In my case, my schedule's been flexible for a long time, so I can kind of go whenever I want. In the middle of the day, weekday doesn't matter to me, right? But I'm fortunate that I can do that, and most of it is stuff that you just don't want to think about or deal with, right? So you don't really analyze it too deeply, because who wants to fucking think about their prosthetic constantly, and like, what's the best way to do something? So it's taken me a long time, just this new technology, and as I said, the technology came about just in the strangest way.
Yeah, I didn't realize that.
Right.
Thank you for. How did you? You had the Team USA jacket on. I want to make sure that people know about this. I'm sure a lot of people know about you already, but you are a very successful cyclist, and I'd love people to hear that story. That's amazing.
Well, the timelines are kind of coincide. After 2006, or at that time, I was working full time, selling cars, and making substantial amounts of money, and in a business that no one with a disability works in. A job that you are on your feet all the time, and you're constantly going from your feet to sitting, to your feet to sitting. And I did that for a few years before the new technology, and that was a nightmare. And then once the sleeves showed up, and you can just literally just slide in and lock your leg in a second, if it fits and if you can get it aligned right. But selling cars, working in that environment, you're wearing a suit, because you have to hide your,
especially the kind of cars you were selling.
Yes,
very high end.
Right. So, and in that industry, and the owners and the management of those companies are typically run by very mentally unhealthy people who thrive on this. I don't know, if I'm going to make any money today.
Mm.
If I don't sell anything, I don't make any money. If, I need, so you have to be aggressive, yet,
Pleasant.
pleasant. People have to like you.
Yeah.
And in my case, the people that I sold cars to liked me. The people I worked for didn't like me. So,
Sorry to hear that.
well, it was very painful, very difficult. Because they expect you to be aggressive in one way, but then they want you to be an idiot who does whatever they say in another way, whether it makes sense or not.
Mm-hmm.
So I worked there for a lot of years. I put up with a lot of stuff, and the guy who originally hired me at Penske Automotive killed himself in a car accident.
Oh boy!
Driving a Porsche at 150 miles an hour down
Wow.
Scottsdale Road. And when he died, he was my protection, and I didn't know it at the time.
Oh.
And so then they started this campaign to get rid of the only disabled person that worked for the entire group. So 12 dealers. There was nobody with any physical impairment whatsoever, except for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to get shoved, pushed around from dealer to dealer, which they didn't do. You typically, if you sold at BMW, you didn't sell at Porsche. If you sold at Jaguar, you didn't sell at BMW. So they would, move me from used cars to Jaguar to BMW to new cars to used cars. So every 3 or 4 months, they would say, "Oh yeah, we need somebody in, here. So you're going here," and so all your customers were something else.
Yeah.
Right. So. But it didn't change the fact that I was always 1 or 2 top salespeople, wherever I was, because I was there for one reason, and I knew what that reason was. And I guess I kind of had a sixth sense for a little bit of an understanding that I just needed to make as much money as I could while I was there, and I never bought anything. So I worked with people who bought new cars every year. We're always leasing, at the store they worked at, and paying this ridiculous payments. And I would just be buying the beaters, the old cars out of the auction in the back, every 5 years, and just driving it into the ground and spending no money. But
saving
2013, they found a way to get rid of me after I had been abused by 3 different managers, and they had to fire all 3 managers.
Wow.
Because there was no, it was clear that I was being abused, and these managers were abusing other people and stealing, and they were, clearly had been ignoring a bunch of stuff. But then, when I, made a case, and so after the 3rd guy got fired, they decided it was me that needed to go. So they figured out a way to make that happen. I left 2013 reluctantly. They ended up giving me a little bit of a severance, which in car sales, they don't give anybody severance. They don't give anybody anything. They just send you on your way. And, but they saw the writing on the wall that it was going to be a legal issue. So, but it's Arizona, so I got a tiny fraction of what I would have gotten in California or Illinois or any kind of a reasonable state that has real laws that govern what they can do and can't do. And I just had been riding my bike the last couple of years to work every day. I rediscovered cycling because I was getting older. I knew I wasn't fit anymore, and I was getting large, and had remembered back to enjoying riding a bike in college. And I just made the decision I was going to try to do that again. As soon as I bought a bike, I quickly remembered why I hadn't been riding one for a long time, because they're extremely painful to ride. with my particular hand and with one leg. So that started a process of trying to figure out how to make the bike work. But in the meantime, I was riding to work every day, lost a bunch of weight. I loved to ride, so I was trying to ride on my days off, trying to ride all the time, as much as I could. I had just recently bought my first road race bike with the help of my brother, who turns out to be a very sweet individual who is also a cyclist, and he gave me this wonderful present with this bike because he can afford to do that. And so I rode. The company, found a way. I left, and I just started riding my bike, and I rode pretty much every day. And now I, could just, ride whenever I wanted, and I could, didn't have to work 60 hours a week. So, and I was living with someone at the time who initially was okay with the fact that I wasn't working. That didn't last long for her, but didn't matter. I decided after 3 or 4 months that I wasn't going to go back to the car business, or at least not anytime soon, or I didn't know what I was going to do. But I was on a ride somewhere in California for some reason. Some guy saw me, he connected with me and said, "Hey, there's this Paralympic thing. You need to go to this race in California, at the velodrome, on a track bike." He's like, "Get a track bike and just go to this race." And I'm like, "I don't know what you're even talking about." I didn't had any experience with that kind of cycling, or what the hell it is, or seen it on television. The Olympic Games, you see the velodrome cycling is, cool, totally cool, but I didn't know what it was. But I figured it out. I ended up, getting a bike somehow, or, going to an event. And at the event, the people that run the Paralympic program said, "Oh, we're starting this new Live at the Olympic Training Center program.
Wow.
You should apply. You should come to, this training athlete, beginners athlete training thing." And so I showed up with a track bike and rode in the velodrome, and immediately went, "Oh wow, this is amazing, and I don't know what the hell I'm doing, but this is amazing." And then I applied for this residency, and a couple of months later, they're like, "Yep, move to Colorado Springs, live at the training center."
Wow.
And my what is now my ex, she was wanted me to go back to work anyway, so I really didn't want to be around her. Things weren't fabulous, and hadn't been fabulous for a while, but that's a whole nother story. And so I said, "I'm going to the training center to live until the Rio Games in 2016. So this was 2014, end of 2014, beginning of 2015. And what could she say? She didn't like it or want it or anything, but she put up with it. So, fortunately I was there and I didn't have to see her. And so that, worked out that way. But so that's where the whole Paralympic
That's fantastic.
Racing started.
And you've been to 25 countries, I think you said today, when I was listening. At
Yeah.
least 25. Wow, 25 countries representing Team USA. And
Yes.
very decorated cyclist. I mean, that is so cool.
Well, 21 national championships.
Wow.
So road cycling, time trialing, and velodrome track cycling over the last 10 years. And then did not know enough about cycling to make it to the Rio Games. Turned out the Olympic Training Center was not an ideal place to actually live and train. And it turned out the Paralympic team was not actually capable or interested in guidance
Huh.
or coaching in an appropriate way to. But I had a friend at the Olympic Training Center who was going through the exact same thing as me, and he was more of a researcher, like someone I just met. Uh, and he helped me learn a bunch of things while I was at the training center. And that's when I started to travel and learn how to travel with bikes and
Yeah.
build bikes and take bikes apart and travel with them and show up to a race and you know. And so in Italy in 2015, I showed up to my first race, um, and was sitting at a starting line with 20 guys with one leg and 50 other guys with other disabilities, and just my mind was blown. It was like, and we all had these custom setups to ride with one leg, and everybody's was completely different because every person had made their
I was
own
going to ask if you did that.
version of
Yeah.
it. So it was hilarious just to see that 20 20 versions of the exact same thing done totally differently, uh, somewhat similar, but and so I was just hooked at that point. Wanted to, couldn't get enough of the next race, and so successful enough
Very successful.
to make the team.
Yeah.
To then get paid to go to the races, and they would arrange travel, arrange all the accommodations, and all the support, and food, clothing, the typical race things. So 2015 is kind of where it began, and 2016 was not enough time to learn how to race to make the team. So they took 19 people to the Rio Games, and I was number 20
Oh, wow.
on the qualification scale. So I was 20 seconds
Oh,
in a race from uh, you know going to Rio. And by that time, I had learned that the Olympic Training Center was no fun, not a place for me. A lot of young kids there, and so and of course, none of the stuff that had promised by the team had happened. Not that they didn't give me an opportunity, and not that it wasn't amazing in some ways, and not that they weren't doing the best they could.
hmm.
But the travel continued. I moved back to Arizona, and it turns out, the way the team is set up, you don't train with your teammates anyway, and it's all a solo kind of a gig anyway. It's not like professional cycling.
Got it.
Where there's these big teams and they all ride together and they all help each other. Paralympics is different. You're all completely out for yourself, and because that's the only way to make the team. And it's all based on your own personal performance, and it doesn't matter if you help your teammate win a race, you don't get credit for that.
Mm.
So it's actually like the opposite. You don't want your competitors to know what you're doing or how you're doing it.
Interesting.
Right, which is not what you want, for a team dynamic. So fortunately, I was with that, with their help and being on the team, I was able to travel, all over the world. So many different races, so many different places. None of it has been to the games. Similar situation happened for the Tokyo Games. Pandemic didn't help things much, but most of that time I was on the team or close to the team or just barely off the team. And the team that goes to the games is not the same team that is the daily Team USA. So they have 25, 30, 40 people on the team, but typically 15 go to the games. So even though those are the same people, there's this contingent of people like me that are part of the team and are getting paid and getting taken to races and getting funded somewhat. Funding is very small,
Yeah.
and it depends how successful you are and how many medals you win. So I fortunately am on the kind of top 5 of the world. So
Wow.
pretty much for my whole 10-year career, I was either 4th, 5th, or 6th. And you need to be first, second, or third. So without the medal, you do not get certain support, and the support, gets less and less the farther out you are.
Hmm.
So for most of the 10 years, I've gotten, 15 fourth places and, 10 fifth places, and
Well, I would be
another
stoked
10
if I did that.
six
So.
places. I realized a few years ago that it was just the racing that was important.
That's great.
When Tokyo happened, 2020, I kind of turned the corner that this is not about going to the games.
Yeah.
I mean, coincidentally, I probably wasn't going, but you need to be happy about what you're doing.
Yeah.
Regardless, and most of the people that do all the racing and show up to all the events and travel around the world to race don't win medals, and most of those people don't go to the games.
Wow, I did not know that.
So 500 people show up to a para race in Belgium or something. 400 of those people are not going to the games, or 300 of them are not going to the games. And it just depends what country you race for. Some countries take people to all the races and take people to the games that can't win medals, just because that's the way they're funded. And they're like, no, anyone who potentially can race and is in top 10 in the world, we'll take them to a race. But Team USA is a private company, not funded by the government, dictated by their sponsorship money, what they can afford and what they will afford. And so it's complicated, and cycling is, probably the most expensive sport in the world. And you have to maintain 3, if you're riding a 2-wheel bike like I ride, you have to maintain 3 bikes.
And those are expensive.
So
oh boy.
You got to have a track bike, you have to have a time trial bike, and you have to have a road race bike.
Wow.
On top of maybe a training bike.
Yeah.
On top of possibly a bike to ride to the store.
Yeah.
So you end up needing multiple bikes. If you're a hand cyclist on the Paralympic team, you only need 1 bike, and they use the same bike for all the racing.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
And there's a 3-wheel trike, it's called. It's basically a 2-wheel bike, but with 2 wheels on the back. For people with balance, neurological issues, they are supposed to not be able to ride a 2-wheel bike because of the neurology of it. And they only need 1 bike. So when you're, riding the 2-wheel bike at the level I'm riding, you have to have this litany of equipment, and that means the bikes, the race wheels, the training wheels. Those aren't the same things. Race wheels are $7,000 a set. So it's, or you can buy the cheaper, heavier ones. It just depends on, and if your parents aren't funding it, which obviously in my case they're not, who funds that for someone who's 20 years old?
Yeah.
Right. So that limits the possibilities of people who can afford to race and show up. And if the team isn't funding it, they don't buy bikes.
Wow.
They do give money to equipment based on how many medals you win. So if you win more medals, you get more money for equipment. But the good news is I've just been incredibly fortunate to be able to travel all over the world and meet all these people and become friends with all these foreign racers.
That's cool.
And make these connections, which in the last 4 or 5 years I've turned into what I end up, what I love even more than the cycling, the visiting schools.
Yeah, I want to talk about that. I want to make sure people know how to get a hold of you too. So you that's one of the things I think you were talking about from the speech you gave earlier. As you were traveling, you were able to go to a lot of schools, and this was in Europe, and you certainly want to do it out here in the States. So as you move forward, that like first of all, how would people get a hold of you? I think is one thing, but talk about your message and things like that.
Well, I, obviously you can point them in my direction, but I'm easy to find on the internet. So
Todd Key,
Todd Key,
yeah,
and it's Todd Key at Hotmail.
there you go.
.com. And so, and I'm more than excited to get any kind of connection
Yeah,
from anybody for any reason. Uh, Mostly what I talk about, or what I do, is show up to a school, hopefully large crowds of kids, assemblies preferably, but whatever, I go to single classrooms as well. But I bring my bikes, I bring my prosthetics, I bring my gear, my outfit, and it's dramatic to see
yeah,
in person. And I know that just by the reaction I have gotten, and I get just from anybody, students or not. But the reason it's so powerful is because mostly this is something you never see. I know that, just in my experience, I never see anybody like myself.
hmm
And I certainly never hear any story about how it happened or what happened or why it happened or what you're doing or what you could do or how it all works.
hmm
So mostly what I talk about is how it happened to me. The short version, uh, the what I do now. Again, the shorter version than what we're doing here, but showing them how I customized my bike,
that's great.
showing them how I ride it.
Yeah,
Um, they show them how running prosthetics work, how walking prosthetics work. And, I think the, the message that I'm trying, or I'm hoping to kind of get better at, is the adversity part, and understanding, or the bullying, the being different in the world, and you don't have to be an amputee or disabled or a Paralympic cyclist to be to consider yourself different and feel like an outlier,
yeah,
and to have a myriad of problems. And I think, or I know that there's very little understanding that people have problems just in their head, for a variety of reasons, abuse,
hmm
uh, and you can't see those people. You don't know that there's something wrong,
yeah,
or you don't know why, and you don't know how, and you know, typically, growing up and being as old as I am, none of these things are anything anybody wants to talk about, um, almost ever. So unless you're in some special therapy or you're seeking uh, help, which
yeah,
most people don't want to do, or
hmm
don't do, or don't feel comfortable doing, there's just basically no acknowledgement that. And if you can't see the disability, then most likely you're not disabled, right? So I started, back when disability was shunned and no one wanted to know and no one wanted to see and no one wanted to hear about it, to a world that is changed a bit, quite a bit. Uh, the people are not shocked when they see prosthetics now is the same way. Um, they're not they're not put off by it. I get I get a myriad of reactions. I decided about 20 years ago to stop wearing pants, as in only shorts, uh, because it technically is easier to deal with prosthetics when you are wearing less. And it certainly is easier to take off, remove, put on, and quickly, and not, without much labor. And when I, became um, my self consciousness kind of disappeared, it became easier. And I've noticed that in the last 15 years, people don't react with the same uh, confusion and fear and anger that I used to get. uh, and before the Iraq War, the world was a very different place for disabilities. And if I had already started wearing shorts everywhere I went, and I went to ASU, and for a good 10 years of my life, I encountered every human emotion that anyone could possibly demonstrate. And that has almost completely changed now. People used to get angry. Some people used to get angry and get physical and get vocal about how dare you walk around like that? How dare you be out in public?
Wow.
And that reaction is gone, mostly, almost completely. People still, stare. Sometimes people are surprised. They're almost never frightened. I used to get that from people, but they're curious.
Yeah.
More than anything. So I get a lot of thank you for your service before
As I do.
before they
I do too.
ask the important question.
Yes.
I get a variety of what happened to you before they've even introduced themselves. Sometimes it happens in public. Sometimes people scream it across the room.
Yeah, I know all these stories. I get it. If you happen to be watching on YouTube, we just had some lights go out, so we're still here. We're still talking. If you're listening on one of the podcast platforms, come to YouTube and take a look and see all these great prosthetics and his bike. You can see it there.
Absolutely.
Well, I've taken a lot of your time. We're going on an hour right now. If we can do another episode, because I know there's a lot more to your story.
That would be fabulous.
I just want to thank you though, because your first of all, your time, your cycling story is amazing. I'd love to get into that a little bit more. We do need to do another one, because even going to school, like there's a few people. There's only a few people I've interviewed on the We're Not Stumped podcast that went to elementary school with limb difference, or amputee, however you want to say it. You're one of them. We didn't get a chance to talk to that. And I'd love to talk to that a little bit more. But, again, we're coming up on an hour. I've taken a lot of your time. And there's so much more to the Todd Key story that I don't want to brush over, because it's an amazing story. I did when he was talking about the research earlier, it was me doing a lot of research on him. Amazing individual here. If you want to get a hold of Todd, he already told you his email address. I'll have it in the description. But I'd love to see you do more of your speaking, because I just got a taste of it today at Toastmasters, and it was fantastic. So thank you for your time today, Todd. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for the invite. And yes, if this leads to more invitations to speak and to schools, that would be amazing, because I don't do enough of it, and I would love to do a lot more of it.
That was the We're Not Stumped podcast, hosted by Mike Boland. If you want to be a guest on the program, reach out to Mike at his email address, mike@mikeboland.com. This podcast is produced by One Hand Man Productions. If you are looking to start your podcast, go to onehandmanproductions.com.